Hey everybody, and welcome back to the podcast. Today we're joined by repeat guest and friend of the show, the one and the only Brian McLaren. So
Mhm.
Brian, welcome back. It's always a pleasure.
Hey, so good to be with you again, Glenn.
Thank you. It's been a long time, I feel like. It's been a while. We're overdue.
That's right. That's right.
All right, so Brian has a new book out called The Last Voyage, a fictional tale or parable of sorts about how the Earth is on the brink of collapse, which unfortunately doesn't always feel all that fictional these days. But
Mm.
Brian, let's jump into this. Could you begin by maybe giving us a brief overview of the story? I don't want to give away spoilers, but I think a general trailer of sorts for our listeners would be helpful so they have a backdrop of what we're talking about.
In a universe far
Far,
away.
far away.
Um, so this is a novel in the science fiction genre
Mhm.
that takes place in a near-term future in the 2050s.
Mhm.
For science fiction, that's very near term. And it imagines current trends being extended into the 2050s. And so power is being concentrated among a smaller and smaller group of super wealthy individuals. I know it's hard for people to imagine that.
Oh, what is that?
And two of these oligarchs uh, don't want to go along with what's being done in concentrating that power. And they decide to invest. They're also very afraid that these other oligarchs are going to create catastrophic effects.
Mm.
So they decide to team up and plan a voyage to Mars, but or a series of voyages to Mars. But this isn't just an exploratory mission. They're really serious about establishing an assurance colony, and not just of human beings, but of plants and animals and a big gene pool and all that sort of thing. So it's kind of a save, not just save humanity, but save the biosphere move. And and they find out that some things on the colony are going way worse than expected. Some secrets have been kept from them. And when they find this out, they realize we can only send one more voyage, and this time we have to send not just engineers and you know traditional scientists, but we actually have to send some people who pay attention to the human element and the element of life.
Mm.
So instead of uh, the normal cast of characters for a space voyage, they need some poets and musicians and a theologian, and they need some people who specialize in plants and animals because they start to realize that human beings don't exist apart from their connection to the larger web of life.
Mm.
So
Yep.
that's the setting, and some surprises come up, and things are even worse than they expected.
No, I love that cast of characters because I mean it's different than what you would normally see, in that kind of science fiction space. So I love the fact that, you're bringing in musicians and artists and
Mm,
creative people because we often think that, we don't have the gifts that can really change the world, when in reality,
mm.
it's those people who can change the world. And I think that's
Yeah,
so important for people to realize.
in fact, just the way that we use that phrase change the world, the irony is it's humanity that's the problem, not the world. And
That's right.
the changing of humanity is what the humanities really tend to focus on. So,
That's
yeah.
right. That's right. So as I was making my way through the story, it felt like, and I don't know if this was your intention or not, but it felt like the story was a parable or illustration built on some of the ideas in your last book, Life After Doom. Like if we were back in seminary, I was thinking like in homiletics class, learning about an expository sermon. Life After Doom was like the detailed explanation. The Last Voyage is a super good illustration. And the podcast and other podcasts you've been on is kind of like the application, like the now what do we do with
Yeah.
this material? And I was wondering, was that intentional on your part, or would that just kind of come together?
Well, it uh, might surprise people, but actually, I started the last voyage in 2016. The literally the day after the election in 2016, when it was clear that the American public had elected an oligarch who typified the values of oligarchs.
Mm.
Uh, and when I saw that happen the next day, I literally opened a file and I'd had this idea knocking around for a novel for a while. I opened a file called The Last Voyage and started writing.
Yeah,
And
now's the time.
so really the fictional treatment of this has been kind of the overarching
Mhm.
um, project. And that's especially going to become clear. It's a trilogy, and in the second and third, but especially the third novel, is a novel about imagining different futures on the other side of our current world order.
Mhm.
And I remember that day I felt like back in 2016, we have set things in motion that are going to run their course. We you know, once once you're speeding at 120 miles an hour and you slam the brakes on, you still don't have a safe landing necessarily.
That's
You
right.
might spin out and all the rest. So I said we have to start imagining what can happen on the other side of the chain of events that we've already set into motion.
Yeah, that's right. The idea of the book kind of, I mean, it makes me laugh. I mean, it's obviously not funny, but I laugh because I've thought of this before. Like the Earth has become such a mess. And like, what if we just hopped on a spaceship and started fresh on some other habitable planet? But then I think to myself, like we kind of alluded to earlier, like, man, that would just we would probably just screw that up too, right? Because we'd bring all of our problems with us. And so then I wonder, as you said before, like maybe we don't need a change of scenery, like a new planet, a new Earth, as much as we need a change of heart, and that
Yes.
comes after wrestling with some really big and important questions. So I'm curious, like as you're writing this book and now it's out in the public, you're working on the other two that will be out eventually. Like what kinds of big important questions are you hoping that this book is going to lead readers to wrestle with? Because your target audience obviously isn't it's not world leaders. It would be nice if world leaders would read it. I can think of a handful that should, but the target is everyday people. And so like what kind of questions are you hoping your everyday people readers will wrestle with as they work their way through the story?
Yes. Well, I think in the short run, Glenn, we all of us are struggling with hope as we have traditionally understood it.
Hmm.
Um, my little definition of hope is the feeling you have when your solutions are bigger than your problems. But what happens when it feels that your problems have grown bigger than your solutions? And many people then experience despair. And the terrible thing about despair is that despair does the same thing to us as complacency. It renders us inactive. We cease to be protagonists in the unfolding of our own story. We just are basically trying to put our heads down and survive whatever comes, and we're letting history happen to us rather than taking seriously our role in creation and
Hmm.
creativity. So we need something better than that old understanding of hope. And so one of the things I'm hoping that people will experience as they read the book is they'll start to get a feeling of a kind of hope that goes beyond that old kind of hope. And it's a kind of hope that involves the opening to new possibilities that we can't even imagine now because we're working within the set of our own solutions.
Yeah. Yeah.
And most of our current solutions are technological, and economic. We think that money and technology will solve our problems, and and even among religious people, you would think that they have a lot of trust in God or the Spirit or whatever. But isn't it interesting to see how many religious people, all of their effort is in the area of politics these days? And they're more excited about a political leader than they are about the founder of their religion in many cases.
Yeah.
So, or the founder of their religion is important after they die, but while they're alive, they want to put their trust in an oligarch.
Hmm.
So, uh, so what I'm hoping can happen in people is that they will feel their imagination stimulated to go beyond where it currently goes.
That's right. You know, I'm in this space in my own journey where I feel like I'm entering into like a new layer of my own deconstruction as
Yeah.
I'm rethinking just my worldview and like my
Mm.
approach to the world. And I just feel like, especially the last election, like I felt like I came to this point where I was just like, this is just not working
Yeah.
anymore. Like I feel like the way that we're doing it on the left and the right, the system, it's broken. Do you mind if I read for you an excerpt?
Yeah.
You wrote it. I'm going to read for our listeners an excerpt from the book. And I actually read this to my mom because we were having a conversation about politics. And I'd love if you could just comment on it in a minute here. Let's see. It's in the chapter one and page three, we're right at the beginning, just a few paragraphs down. A girl named Gabriella is driving her car, I believe, in Guatemala.
Yes.
And she says, or the narrator says, all the world's poor knew what Gabriella and her mother knew, that the world was ruled by oligarchs, American, British, Russian, Chinese, Saudi, Brazilian, whatever. They were all remarkably similar. Oligarchs kept the government officials, whether elected or appointed, like lap dogs on short leashes. Their pet politicians protected them, licking their hands, performing their tricks, attacking their enemies when commanded to do so, passing laws to protect and enhance their interests. In return, the oligarchs made their pets moderately rich. They rewarded their hungry little egos with tasty treats, and they assured their re-election. If the politicians didn't comply, the oligarchs had convincing methods of punishing them. A cheap replacement was always easy to acquire. The oligarchs themselves were connected to one another by networks of threat and obligation, and their networks were intertwined with global crime syndicates, not to mention local criminals, private militia, and of course, pliable political parties. Behind them, there were lines of smiling religious leaders eager for handouts in exchange for providing moral camouflage for the nearest oligarch's decadent behavior. Nearly every oligarch on earth was surrounded by this nervous, eager, nodding flock of yes men, little men, and few women who gained a fortune and lost their souls by telling the bosses what they wanted to hear. As a result, most oligarchs lived inside invisible bubbles of narcissism, echo chambers of arrogance from within which they could go for decades without anyone daring to disturb them with a contrary opinion. And this had me hooked, Brian, because like I feel this, right? And I was talking to my mom about politics. I said to her, I was like, I got to read for you this. I'm reading this book by Brian McLaren. I said, I got to read for you this excerpt from the book because it describes so well what we were talking about. And I said to her, like the system just isn't working anymore. Like maybe there was a time when it was. I don't know. Back when my great great grandpa had immense pride for his country, he came here as an immigrant from Switzerland. He had just his rosary beads, which I have on my table behind me, and his Bible in his pocket. Like, it's all he had. And he was building a new life that would benefit, generations to come. And there was a lot of pride in that. But now it's like it's a different world. Like there's too much money, there's too many people with too much power, and us, you, me, politicians, like we don't have any control. Whatever control we think we have, like as this
Yeah.
excerpt from the book describes, like it's just if it feels like it's just an illusion.
Yeah.
And there are people like way, way, way at the top pulling these strings in an effort to move chess pieces across the board, and then people at the bottom of the ladder the benefit when, I should say the top of the ladder benefits when the people at the bottom are divided. And then like
Yes.
every 4 years we do the same thing, right? We hope that there's going to be something different, some kind of change, but like it never really comes. And like
Yeah.
even the change is an illusion because we might get some, like we get a taste of it, but it's not good, lasting life change for everybody. Like instead,
Yeah.
somebody always benefits and somebody else, usually a marginalized group, suffers and they get mowed over, forgotten, tossed aside. And I said, the system is just broken. And I said, I feel like we just need to come together and imagine something different. And I feel like
Yeah.
that's the heart of this book is imagining like what if there was a different way to do this? What would
Mm.
happen? So
Yeah.
anyway, I would love if you could interject into the
Mm.
conversation I had with my mom and just give your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Well, first of all, you know, I think it's important for you and I as white guys to remember that for all of that time where it seemed like democracy was working for people like us, it certainly wasn't working for Native Americans
That's
and
right.
African Americans and
Yep.
Japanese and many other non-white people. And uh, and and it reminds me of a manuscript I just read from a brilliant friend of mine named Kelly Burton,
Mm.
African American thinker and writer. And she has a book that will be out, I hope, in the next year or two, but maybe the next year. I don't know what the final title is going to be. But in the beginning of this book, she says just this really powerful short sentence, something like this: Before America was a democracy, it was a corporation.
Mm.
And she has the receipts to prove that's the case, right? Um, uh, a little bit like, and in some ways, that's what I'm playing with in the novel. It's two oligarchs who create a corporation uh, to launch this voyage, and when a corporation is your fundamental identity, uh, it creates a universe that you live in,
Mhm.
a set of values that are primarily economic. And I think one of the one of the assumptions that it's time for us to break out of is the assumption that the way we're running our lives within the current economy is the only way to run our lives.
Yeah,
I remember years ago, I used to say, there used to be something called music, but now there's the music business.
that's
And there
right.
used to be something called sport, but now there's the sports industry. There
Yeah.
used to be something called politics, but now there's the military industrial complex. And so we realize the degree to which economics has taken over everything. And we can't even imagine a different world.
Yep.
But the fact is, there are many ways that human beings can organize their lives. And the way we're currently doing it is not the only one. It's certainly not a sustainable one. I don't think it's the best one, but it was the cheapest one and the one that could help a few people make the most money the fastest. Um, so yeah, this is when where our imagination, things have to get bad enough within the current system to make us want to imagine a better system.
That's right. That's right. My own small way, I mean, I've been look at the podcast and the art behind me and things like that. Like I
Yeah,
have resisted the urge to businessify it, so to
yes,
speak.
yeah,
Like and I feel like there's a lot of pressure to do
yeah,
that because I mean we live in a capitalist society and
yeah,
things don't have value
yeah,
in a lot of people's eyes if they don't have monetary value. Like, oh, you're not. I have people say like, well, you've been doing the podcast for 8 years now, like, which is a long time. You must be having, making some money with it. I'm like, well, a little bit, but like not really. I have some
yeah,
people who
yeah,
want to support it, and I started a Patreon account because, people wanted to have a place to give. But like it's not, I've resisted like putting a lot of ads on the show. Like I've had a
yeah,
lot of people, you want to have sponsors and you can make money. And even like with my art, I have this thing where it's this is how much a suggested price of what it costs me to buy the supplies and the time, but pay what you want if you
yeah,
want. And so I've
yeah,
actually given tons of things away for free, like stuff that I've worked hours and hours on, but
yes,
somebody really loved it, but they didn't have any money for it. I said, it doesn't matter. You can have it anyway. A smile on your face is payment enough, but I feel like in my own little way, like that's a radical stance for me against in a very small way, in a very big picture that we're living in. Like it's my way of making a statement that like I don't want to do that. Like I want to
yeah,
imagine a different way to be. I want to be able to use my gifts and the things that I do that doesn't require payment, that doesn't
yes,
require some sort of exchange. Like I just want to
yes,
give to you from the goodness of my heart. And if you want to, give something, that's fine. I'm not gonna say no. It's gonna help pay the groceries, but at the same
right,
time, it's not a requirement. And so
yes.
I feel like that's my way of using my imagination to do something a little bit different in the world.
You're making me think of a couple of things, Glenn. One is years ago, a very wise man who was one of my early teachers, uh, he said, uh, the word amateur has at the beginning AMA, ama, which is from amar, to love.
Mm,
An amateur is someone who does something for the love of doing it.
sure.
And we sometimes use amateur, like amateur is a step below professional. Professional is when you do something for money, right?
Yep.
Um, but no, when people do things for love, the things they do have a special quality. And you imagine a whole lot of people doing a whole lot of things for love, and it's a different world that we live in.
Yep.
And then when people are exchanging the things they do for love, you give me something that comes from your overflow of love. I give you something that comes from my overflow of love. That's exchange. You could even call it an economy, but it's
Yep.
an economy of love rather than an economy of sort of heartless transaction.
That's right.
And everything in our lives that means a lot to us, we don't go around. I mean, some dysfunctional parents maybe do this, but we don't keep track of how many hours we spend cleaning our children's clothes or, changing their diapers or saving up for their college tuition and then present them a bill at the end and say, here's how much you owe me.
Right.
Uh, you know, the love of doing it is what makes being a parent so incredibly meaningful. We don't do this with our spouses. We don't do it with our parents. The most meaningful relationships we have tend to be the relationships that come from being amateurs at doing things for love. So this to me, it brings to mind a line from the New Testament: "Let everything you do be done with love."
Yep.
Um, it, 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 this idea of infusing it. So even, let's say I'm a clerk at a store and I'm a cashier at a store and I'm getting paid. It's my job. But if I decide every person who comes down my aisle at the grocery store, I want to give them some smile. I want to give them some human contact. I want to do something that shows I respect them as a person. Uh, I'm going to feel better at the end of the day.
Right.
And all of those people will too. So even the things that do involve exchange of money, we can infuse them with love. And I think we all have that feeling, when you're in the hospital and there's that nurse who shows you the extra care, when you're crossing a street and the police officer doesn't just think, here's another person I'm helping cross the street, but
Right.
you realize this person sees me as part of the public that he or she is a servant of. Yeah, it changes things.
That's right.
And when somebody paints or makes a podcast or writes a book,
Yep.
and love is their motivation, it's a very special thing.
That's right. And we all have, like you said, we all have those things. Like I think if we
Yes.
all look deep inside, even the people who we might assume love nothing, like
Yeah.
we all have those people in our life that we assume they don't have those things deep down, but deep down inside we all have those things somewhere. And I think for me, like one of the places I'm challenging myself in this new phase of deconstruction is to realize that to remember, as hard as it is, that we are more than our beliefs and
Yeah.
we are more than our voting choices.
Yeah.
Like beyond those things, there's a human being. And
Yeah.
like who we vote for and the things we believe about God, it's such a, they can impact obviously our greater life, of course,
Yeah.
but at the same time, it's such a small piece of who we are because like there's a guy up the street who still has Trump flags on his house. He likes Trump a lot, and he still has his flags out. But I try to remember that like, you know, that might really annoy me. It might stir something up in me. But at the same time, there's a human being behind those flags who was once
Mhm.
an 8-year-old boy
Yeah.
who once had dreams and hopes of his own. And somewhere deep down inside, those dreams and hopes still exist. And so I try to remember that like there's a human being who lives in that home. And somehow that can create even a little bit of empathy in my heart. And I can start to hold a different kind of energy about
Yes.
that person. And so when we do eventually, if we do eventually have any kind of conversation about politics, it will involve me, first of all, realizing there's a human being in front of me, not just
Mm.
somebody who hangs a Trump flag on their house. And so for me, like that's been a really hard thing to grapple with because coming from the evangelical world, we're always right. And the way that we do things and believe is always right. And then even moving to the left, it was also a lot of, well,
Yes.
now I'm right. It's like it's the
Yes.
same kind
Yes.
of
Yes. Yes.
energy, but now I'm just directing
Yes.
it a different place. And so I'm really trying to rethink the energy that I hold without compromising my values. And I feel like that's just such a mysterious place for me to be living, but I feel like
Mm,
my intuition is saying like this is the right kind of way to go. And I
yes.
feel like, hopefully that can inspire other people as well. I mean, I don't know. So, yeah.
Well, that's sure feels and sounds like growth to me.
Yeah.
Hey, can I tell you a quick story
Please, I'd
that
love
relates
to.
to that?
Thank you.
So I live in Florida, and
Mhm.
I moved here in 2009. In I don't know 2010 or 2011, somebody bought an empty lot behind my house and started building a house. So I always want to know my neighbors and have a good relationship with my neighbors. And so I met this guy. He was about 10 years older than me, and uh, he you know how you meet some people as they get older, they just get sweeter and
Mhm.
sweeter and kinder. He was not one of those people. Let me just say
God,
it that way.
opposite.
And he was a white guy. I'm white. And there's something that white people do sometimes. They they test each other to see, like they drop a little racist statement, or
Mhm.
or men drop a little anti-woman statement, or straight people drop a little anti-gay statement.
Yep.
And in a way, they're testing out to see how much agreement they have with this other person. And so he would drop anti-Muslim statements and he would drop anti-black statements. And so I would always say, well, I don't see it that way, Robert. If you ever want to know why I see it differently, just ask. I'll be glad to let you know. He never asked, right? Um, and one day he says horrible things about the government, like he hates the U.S. government. And so I just stopped him. I said, Robert, I don't think I've ever met anybody who hates the US government as much as you do. There must be a story behind that. And I'm not kidding, Glenn. It was like somebody flipped a switch. And he says, as soon as I said, tell me the story behind that, he said, I was 19 years old. I enlisted in the army to go fight in Vietnam because I believed in this country.
Mhm.
And then he went on to tell me how when he was in Vietnam, his commanding officers were selling US military equipment to the Vietnamese and putting the money in their pocket, and how they were all seeing prostitutes and shooting heroin, and how they hadn't cleaned their guns in weeks or months. And suddenly I saw this zealous, sincere 19-year-old who between the ages of 19 and 22 became so disillusioned with everything he'd believed in and still was carrying the pain and bitterness of that disillusionment.
Yeah.
And I just saw him, just as you say, suddenly he became a human being on a deeper level, uh, that that I still abhor his racism and sexism and religious supremacy and all the rest. But I saw him as a human being, and there was a story behind it. And there's a teaching in Buddhism. It has different names, but one of the names is the law of no independent origination. And the big
Mhm.
idea is nothing happens unless the conditions are right for it to happen. And so then you realize that guy up the street with the flag, the conditions were right for him to become the kind of voter and uh, citizen that he's become. And if we want different outcomes, we have to then start working for different conditions, which is exactly what Jesus said when he talked about what kind of seeds we sow determine what kind of fruit we'll harvest.
Yep, that's right. So good. I'm reading a book right now called The Next Conversation. And
Mm,
the author he is a lawyer. And so he's writing this book about how to talk to people who you disagree with and who disagree with
mm,
you, because he's often in the very heated exchanges. And one of the things he says is we need to work on reframing our understanding of conversation, that
mm,
it's not about who can say more. It's not about winning an argument. It's not about coming out on top. It's
mm.
about understanding the other person.
Yeah.
And he said, if you can, he said, I've sat down in rooms with who you would consider maybe the most horrible people on earth. And he said, been able to have a conversation with them because I put aside my own agenda. I put
Yeah.
aside my own need to be right. And I asked a couple more questions. And he
Mm,
said, I've had men who are these big, bulky men who just look like they're hard as a rock. He said, break down in tears across
mm,
from me because I asked a few more questions about why they did what they did or how they got to the place they're at. He said the stories I've heard of people that, like you said, the elements were right in their life to create this person who's in front of me. He said it's just mind-boggling. But he said if we could all approach our differences in that way, where instead of trying to be right and beat the other person in the argument,
Mhm.
we seek to understand. He said it would just
Yeah.
create such a different world that we
Mm-mm.
could live in. And I think that's such wisdom that you shared. So thank you.
Well, I think that's, and in a way, I think that's why we write and read fiction, because by creating imaginary stories and running them through in our imagination when we write, or creating them in our imagination as we read, it slows us down enough to then say, why would she say that? Why would he say that?
Yeah,
And it helps us practice some of those skills of empathy and humanizing the other and humanizing a stranger who's totally unknown to us, right?
that's right.
So I think it's one of the reasons why we're all drawn to whether it's novels or movies or podcasts or The Moth, or This American Life. We're drawn to hearing stories.
That's right. So we know about things that, Brian, that aren't working in the world. We could probably rattle off at least 15 to 20 things that we need to leave behind as we move forward. But I'm curious, like, what are your thoughts on things that are working?
Mm,
Like, what are some things that collectively we've begun doing? Maybe we
mhm,
are doing things that like we're talking about right now. Like, what are some things that if we want to see the world and see collectively humanity move into a positive direction of growth and exponential change,
mm,
what are some things we need to keep on doing as we go forward?
mm. Well, one of the things I hope people feel in the book, I'll just tell you a quick
Mhm.
anecdote about this. Um, I don't go to Amazon and read reviews. I don't go to Goodreads and read reviews normally, but um, I often will at the very beginning when a book first comes out. And I remember I went on Goodreads and someone who'd read the novel said, the characters were interesting, but nobody in real life has conversations where they speak in paragraphs. Um, and I thought, I bet there are a lot of people that have no friends that ever go deep and really engage each other on a deep level. And then I think how blessed I am that so many of my friendships, like you and I right now, we're we're engaging on a deep level. We're not just jumping from subject to subject, and we're not just repeating kind of, you know, little cliches. We're interested in listening and
Yeah,
building off each other. We aren't just trying to find a fault in what each other says, but we're, in a sense, we're on a common pursuit of meaning.
yeah.
And I just think there are so many people who they are not around anyone who does that sort of thing.
Mm,
And so for all of us who can create spaces for those kind of conversations, frankly, I think it's one of the things about podcasts that are so interesting. Podcasts are medium and long form communication where people get to hear a sustained conversation. And so whenever that happens, here's a way to say it. When we decide to jump from the surface track to a slightly deeper track, and then we're there for a while, we say, let's jump to a slightly deeper track and let's jump. Like, for example, a little while ago, you said, I'm going through a new phase of my own deconstruction or
mm,
growth process, right? You revealed something about yourself at that point. So you took it to a little deeper level.
yep,
When we learn to do that with people, whether it's asking a question, what do you think about that? What do you really think about that? Um, how does that affect you? Or whether it's sharing something vulnerable, I think we're making a different kind of a world.
yeah,
When we share with vulnerability, I'm afraid of something, I'm in pain about something, I don't know what to do about this. I used to be sure about this, I'm not sure anymore. When we take those steps of vulnerability, we take a step towards something deeper. When we express sincere appreciation, I admire you, I appreciate you, I respect you. Um, I think we take it to a deeper level. I was with my grandson recently, and he and we share a love of fishing. And so we went fishing, and he had bought his most expensive fishing lure that he'd ever bought. And he threw a cast, and the line broke, and
Mm.
that lure went sailing off into space, never to be seen
Oh
again.
no.
And I watched him, he was disappointed, but he didn't want to lose his temper and get mad and throw his fishing rod down.
Right.
And I watched him. So I stopped him and I said, I just need to tell you, I respect you so much. You took a risk and bought an expensive lure and you tried to use it. Then you lost it and you didn't beat yourself up. You just understood this is part of how things go. And I said, I really respect you for that. It was a chance to take it to a deeper level and
Mm.
not just stay at the surface, but try to go deeper. I think that's one of the things we can do at times like these.
Yeah.
A million of us do that in one little way a day, and it can become contagious. Takes us all maybe to a little deeper level.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, it's again, it's like it's about asking another question, right? And
Yeah,
like what can you learn from the story of somebody else? That's why I love this podcast so much because I feel like the podcast, no matter how many different ways I evolve and change, there's always a what if question because there's always a what if there's a different way to think about this. Let's see what Brian has to say about this. Let's see
yeah,
what somebody else has to say about this. And I feel like that's become my life. Like I feel like the podcast started as like a question, but I feel like now it's becoming more ingrained in who I am. And one of the best experiences I had was when I worked at Apple. I worked there for 11 years and I worked with so many different people. I went in there as an evangelical, my little bubble that I was in, and I'm meeting all these people who are vastly different than me, atheists and LGBTQ people and black and I mean, so many different people. And I remember feeling so overwhelmed because I was like, wow, like my big tower that I thought I lived up in, it's not really as big and fancy as I thought it was. Like there's so many different ways that people think and believe. And I remember just dropping my guard and asking people some questions and just some of the amazing things I learned. Like I worked next to this one woman, black woman, she's gay. And I remember this white guy who was part of Apple's leadership team, like he lived out in California in their offices, came and we worked in this long desk together. It was me and her, she was right next to me, and this guy would sit on her desk and move her keyboard out of the way without saying anything. And I didn't think anything of it, but it bothered her or really bothered her. She got really upset. And I said to her, I said, could you mind explaining to me why that upsets you so much other than his rear end is on your on the desk, which is kind of gross. I said, but what else is going on? And she said, well, it's about microaggression. I was like, I've never heard that term before. I said, can
mm,
you explain it to me more? And she explained to me what that is. Then she explained to me things from her past and growing up in New York City and all these different things. And I got to know this person
yeah,
and then I got to see, like, oh, she's not just angry about something that seems silly. This goes really, really deep.
yeah,
And now I understand a little bit more, even about the black community, about racism, and about things that I just were not even on my radar as your everyday white guy. Like, I had no idea. But again, because I was willing to ask those couple of questions, I learned so much. And I think, like you said, like if collectively going forward, if we could all on both sides of the bird and in the middle, if we could all have that approach where we ask each other some more questions, what could change? What do we have to lose, right? I mean,
yeah,
it can't get any worse. It has to be able to get better. So I feel like that's just such an easy thing to take forward with us. And if we could begin practicing it in the small areas of life, the
yeah,
little day-to-day interactions with people, and then carry that forward into the bigger conversations, what could happen?
yeah, yeah. Very well
Yeah.
said. Very
All right,
well said.
last question for you, Brian. What are you doing these days to maintain hope, to
Mm,
keep loving? Because it's so easy, like we said, to be defeated. It's easy to go to bed and feel like, things are never going to change. It's easy to hate. It's easy to
yeah.
judge. It's easy to feel arrogant, right? That my side has all the answers and their side is the problem. And how are you working to free yourself of, the way that things are so that you can continue to hope and love and dream of the way that things could be?
Mm. Well, I usually take a morning walk, and in that morning walk, I try to orient myself for the day.
Hmm.
But a big part of the walk is just being outdoors and trying to remind myself that the problems in the world are primarily human beings,
Yep.
and that the world itself is pretty amazing. A couple of years ago, I took my walk. I came home and things were a mess in the world, and my mind was swirling with all the political craziness. And my wife said, "How was your walk?" I said, "Well, human beings are a mess, but the birds are being awesome." Because they were just singing up a storm that morning. And so one of the things I do is to try to reconnect with those natural rhythms,
Mm.
the beautiful, deep wisdom and logic of creation, and whatever we mean when we say words like God or the divine or spirit. I think we're talking about a pattern that we see in in the universe and in all of life and in the interactions of all the parts of life. So that's one thing. And then another thing is creativity and imagination. I mean, writing is one of the things that helps me because when you feel that your current solutions are smaller than your problems, then you either have to find somebody to blame for your problems. That's not going to solve anything. It'll just make you feel better. Or you can wish you could go back into the past. Well, that's not going to work. It might make you feel better to be nostalgic. Or you're going to have to stretch your imagination. And so that's, to me, anything that stretches my imagination is helps me go in that direction.
I love that. One of the things I've been doing is I think I heard you talk about it on a podcast. I forget which one. I think it was about this book too, but you talked about how you've kind of backed away from social media a
Yeah.
little bit. And I feel like I was so in on so many different places, and I found myself just getting angry all the time. Like I felt like I was always in the comment sections and I was getting annoyed by things, and I realized I was so distracted, like I couldn't read a page of a book without being distracted because I'm so used to scrolling and going to the next thing. And like I just feel
Yeah.
like there was just so much that was going on in my brain. I felt like I just had to back away. And I realized that once I backed away a little bit, I realized like, wow, I'm able to have space to formulate my own opinions because it's so easy to get caught up in what, this person says about that and that person says about that. And you have all these other opinions in your head, and it's hard to
Yeah.
develop your own thoughts. So I feel like once the quietness started to come in, I'm like, wow, I have a lot more space to float around here in my brain and try to think about these mysterious, ways forward that we've been talking about. So for me, that's been a really huge thing because I felt like I was just getting angry, depressed, sad, and just feeling like everything despair, like you said before, which is a hard mud to walk forward through when you're
That's
feeling
right.
despair.
That's I'm glad that you found that's been helpful too. It feels like when other people are reacting to each other, and social media is just a huge amount of reaction,
Hmm.
right? Obviously, there's good things, wonderful things in social media too,
Yep.
but so much reactivity, and uh, and when we feel we're just being caught in other people's reactivity, boy, we start feeling less like significant people and just people who are part of those chain reactions and trains of thought. So
That's right.
there's something about silence and solitude and slowing down. It's one of the reasons I've been reading more poetry at this stage of my life than ever before. It slows me down.
Mm.
And often it's just a handful of poems going back to them again and again and again. Uh, that it, yeah, helps me not feel I'm being jerked around on somebody else's leash.
That's right. That's right. Well, Brian, my friend, we are just about out of time, but this has been a lot of fun. I appreciate you joining me. Thank you for your work and for your friendship. Appreciate you.
And you too. Keep up the great work.
Thank you. And real quick, is there any place online where you want to direct people to go? I know it's same websites, but anything new that you want me to put in the show notes for people?
No, I just think brianmclaren.net, they can get all my
Easy
contacts there.
peasy. Google it and his name is there. Thanks, Brian. Talk to you
Thank
soon.
you.